Chapter 10. Night Scare. With the threat ringing in her ears, Nancy jumped out of bed. The voice had come from outside, so she ran to the window and was just in time to see a man reaching the bottom of a tree. Evidently, he had climbed it in order to call into Nancy's room. She ordered him to stop, but knew it was useless. Quickly, she grabbed her flashlight and pointed it toward the intruder. By now, he was rushing toward some bushes. The light revealed that he was short, had thick, shiny black hair, and wore a gray suit. This was the description Mrs. Rooney had given of the man whom she had seen running from Mr. Moto's store. Could he be Benny Caputi? Nancy concluded that the incident should be reported to the police, and that a guard should be posted at the house if the Drews were to remain there. She put on her robe and slippers and went to her father's room. When he was fully awake, Nancy told him what had happened. He was greatly disturbed, realizing that the man who had climbed the tree might have entered Nancy's room and harmed her. "I like your idea of a guard," he told his daughter. "In the morning, we'll talk it over with the Mises. Actually, I'm embarrassed staying here and putting them through all this trouble. We should offer to move at once." Mr. Drew went to the telephone and called police headquarters. He reported that a man had been roaming around the Mise property who matched Caputi's description. The officer on duty promised to look out for the suspect. Nancy finally went back to bed, but found it hard to sleep, even though she had closed her window and pulled down the bamboo shade. Finally, she dozed off and dreamed about climbing up and down trees after Benny, the slippery one, Caputi, but never catching him. She slept later than usual, but no one disturbed the weary detective. When Nancy finally came to breakfast, her father and the Mises were already eating. Nancy bowed low, which seemed to please her hosts, and said good morning. Mr. Drew had already told the Mises what had happened the evening before. "I mentioned, Nancy, that you and I felt we should leave and not put our kind friends to any more trouble. They wouldn't listen to my proposition. I guess I'm losing my ability to sell an idea." "That is not the reason," Mrs. Mise objected. "We are very interested in the case and want to do all we can to help you solve it. That is why we insist you remain here." Mr. Mise changed the subject by showing the Drews the morning paper. For the benefit of his guests, he had thoughtfully bought an English edition. He pointed to a headline which read, "Daring robbery in jewelry store. Only one valuable piece stolen." The article said that the theft was most unusual. Although the shop had a burglar alarm system, it had not been set off, and the police were at a loss to explain why. Also, they were puzzled by the fact that the only article taken was a necklace containing 25 pearls. The center pearl was very large, and on each side of it were 12 smaller ones. "That sounds like Mrs. Rossmeyer's," Nancy exclaimed. "It does indeed," Mr. Drew agreed. "What do you think happened?" "Benny the slippery one comes to mind," she replied. "I don't know how he got his nickname, but it could mean that he knows how to turn off burglar alarms and slip in and out of jewelry stores unnoticed." "You are talking about the same man who climbed the tree last night and called into your room?" Mrs. Mise asked. "Yes." "But how could he do two things at the same time?" "Does the article mention what time the robbery took place, Nancy?" Mr. Drew asked. "It could have been any time after closing yesterday. When the store's custodian arrived at 5:30 this morning, he discovered that the alarm had been turned off. Thinking this strange, he called the owner of the shop. The man came immediately and discovered that the valuable necklace was missing. He phoned the police, and they, in turn, gave the item to the newspaper just before it went to press. So Benny had plenty of time for the burglary, either before or after he climbed the tree, Nancy said. I certainly wish I could find out if that necklace was Mrs. Rossmeyer's. Possibly Worldwide Gems sold it to that jewelry store, Mr. Drew added. And then Benny or someone working for him went to get it back. To make more money by reselling it, Mrs. Mise added. What a racket! Just then the telephone rang. Hannah Gruen was calling and said that Mr. Drew should phone his office as soon as it was open. Meanwhile, I'll talk to Nancy, she added. The young sleuth was delighted with what Hannah had to tell her. Ned Nickerson, Bert Eddleton, and Dave Evans were coming to River Heights to visit Nancy, George, and Bess. They wanted to know how soon Nancy would be home. I told them I thought in about a week, Hannah remarked. I'll certainly be there by then, Nancy agreed. Dad and I hope to wind up the mystery soon. She told Hannah what happened since the Drews had arrived in Japan. When she came to the part about Caputi climbing the tree and calling into her room, the motherly housekeeper gasped. Oh, Nancy, dear, please watch your step, she begged. Don't worry, Hannah, Nancy replied. I'm doing my best. This is a very puzzling case. After goodbyes had been said, Nancy wondered what to do next. An idea came to her. She said to her father, Let's go outdoors and see if we can find any clues to the man who was here last night. The two excused themselves and walked into the garden. Near the bushes through which the suspect had gone were footprints. These are strange, Nancy said. It's not a complete impression, just the ball of the foot. We can't deduce much from this, but let's see where the prints lead. The fugitive must have been running very fast because only the forward part of the foot is showing, Mr. Drew commented. He was literally on his toes. Nancy, what can you tell from these prints? That the man is short. He takes short steps but doesn't leap. I'd say he's an excellent runner. This may be another reason for his nickname, Benny the Slippery One, if he indeed was the intruder. The Drews followed the shoe prints until they ended in the street, where it was impossible to trace them any further. Nancy and her father returned to where they had started their search and examined the area between the bushes and the tree. Here the ground was firmer and no prints were visible. The Drews looked carefully at the bark of the tree, thinking its roughness might have snagged something from the man's clothing. Soon Nancy detected a few thin, woolly gray threads. Dad, these could be from Benny's suit, she exclaimed. You're right, Mr. Drew replied after examining the evidence closely. I'm sure the police would like to see them. Carefully, Nancy deposited the find in her pocketbook. I wonder why he has such a liking for gray suits, she mused, then began to search around the tree. A few seconds later, the girl sleuth cried out, Oh, Dad! I found another good clue! End of chapter 10.